And welcome back to KTN News Desk. I'm Michael Karanja. Now, Kenyans have been expecting cheaper power, or rather electricity bills, to fall for the longest time. And in studio today, I'm joined by Albert Mugo, who's the managing director of Kengen, one of Kenya's largest power producers. Albert, let's start first of all with your financials that you posted about 2 weeks ago. Very good. Net profits of about 4.9 billion shillings. Revenues were up also to about 11.6 billion shillings. What is driving the growth back at Kengen?
Okay, what's driving the growth in Kengen in our financials is the recently commissioned geothermal project.
Yeah.
As you are aware, last October we commissioned 140 megawatts of geothermal, and last month, actually this month, the president commissioned another 140 megawatts of geothermal. Now, but in terms of the full production, these have been in production since in December last year, and with the few months that we generated from that geothermal, we were able to see an improvement in our half-year results.
Right. Just looking at installed capacity, because I'm assuming now installed capacity is up. I was reading something that's up by about 244 megawatts in total. But what's now the current installed capacity in terms of Kenya's power generation? Okay,
in terms of the total installed capacity for power, we currently have 2,150 approximately megawatts. The demand stands at about 1,520 megawatts.
Yep.
So we have a bit of spare capacity that is necessary when some of the units are the maintenance or probably even from forced outage.
And just looking at that whole generation mix, obviously a lot of your capex has been going into into geothermal. But just looking at that whole matrix of how power generation, what's now taking the pie? Is it geothermal or is hydro still king?
Okay, traditionally hydro has been taking the bigger part of our generation, but for the first time in this country in October last year, when we commissioned the 140 megawatts, the geothermal generated a little more than hydro.
Yeah.
And this year, for example, in the month of January and February, we have recorded geothermal now at 51% of the total energy mix, with the hydro taking about just about 40%, and the thermal and the other sources such as wind taking just about 10%.
All right.
Yeah.
The grand plan is to have 5,000 megawatts. I'm sure by now it's about 4,000 and something still remaining by 2017. But the whole genesis of this is that with increased production comes the advent of cheaper power. Obviously, the government has said power bills have come down by about 30%. But when is that a true representation of what so far has happened? And then secondly, how soon before, or are we expecting too much for power costs to come down even more drastically?
Okay, what we have seen in the recent past is that actually with the onset of the geothermal generation last year, from around August when we started putting in units as we were testing, we started to see a gradual reduction in the power bills. For example, in August last year, the fuel cost charge stood at 7 shillings and 22 cents per kilowatt hour generated. With the coming in of geothermal, we have seen a reduction of that until now, last month and this month, the rates that were announced by the Energy Regulatory Commission yesterday, that is standing now at 2 shillings and 51 Kenya shillings per kilowatt hour. Clearly, that's quite a tremendous reduction, but with the geothermal now having come in fully, it's like we are where there is a stabilization of those charges. Yeah. And so until probably April, when we see some rains and the hydros can produce a little more and displace some of the thermal units, we may not be able to see any reduction now until that time.
Obviously, in your mix, you still have a lot of reliance on a bit of thermal.
Yes.
Obviously, global crude prices have come down, but just how critical is that input from thermal in terms of making sure that we have stable power supply?
Okay, the thermal is very critical for us in the sense that even though geothermal is supplying what we call the base load, running on 24-hour basis, and then the hydro, we use it a bit sparingly because of the little water we have, the thermal will still be needed to meet the peak demand. As you know, the peak demand is usually in the evening for about 3 to 4 hours. At that time, we need the thermal to come in. So we'll never be able to kick out the thermal completely because the demand is also continuing to rise. And while you use the geothermal 24 hours, the hydro as much as you can when the rains are there, you still need the thermal for emergency and for those other times when the geothermal or the hydro unit may not be present.
Right. Just looking at this whole debate about the 5,000 megawatts plus, key concern has been the demand for this power. Because right now we're talking about installed capacity in upwards of 2,000, whereas the demand is still about 1,000. But I'm sure stability is what is crucial. But just looking at that of the demand, are you engaging, especially with companies and manufacturers and everyone who's in this whole matrix, in terms of being able to position themselves to take advantage of this 5,000 megawatts?
Yes, in the sector, in the energy sector, there's been a lot of engagement with the industries. As a matter of fact, the sector itself went into the Plan for Power campaign, where we're looking at talking to investors and people who can utilize this power, asking what is your plan on your upcoming projects. And through that, we've been able to gauge already propellant addition of about 2,000 megawatts. And beyond that, we're also engaging with CAM, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and we are challenging them. For a long time, you claimed that there was not enough power.
Now it's
but
here.
Now it is here. And now it's the boys in your court to ensure that industries come in and employ Kenyans, and in so doing, you consume the power that we are putting in. On the other hand, we also know that recently the Kenya Power Lighting Company has signed a power purchase agreement with Rwanda for uptake of up to about 30 megawatts. And so even within the region, we can see that because of having enough power, our neighbors will be taking some of the power that we're generating.
Right. Obviously, huge capex in terms of just even in terms of your future plans. I have to ask you this, rights issue. Last year, it's what we were talking about, shelved severally. Has the government given any commitment about this 15 million shillings rights issue? And when is the foreseeable time slot that you've actually slated for it?
Okay, thank you for that question. Our shareholders approved our going for rights issue in December 2013.
Yeah.
And in the greater part of 2014, we've actually been engaged in government. Now we've gone to a very advanced stage. There is commitment from government. And when during the commissioning of the 140 megawatts 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
the president didn't allude to this. The government is supporting the rights issue completely, and now we are just waiting for the approval by government. And once that is done, we will start the project. In any case, we expect that before the end of this month, we'll have received the approval, and so we are seeing the rights issue being able to come in by August, September this year.
And what will the money be going to specifically?
Okay. When we look at what we've done this far, we've brought in the geothermal. We are happy with the capacity that come in.
Yeah.
Our strategy going forward, our plan now is to bring in an additional up to 350 megawatts of geothermal and 100 megawatts of wind, with a total financial requirements of about $1.3 billion US. So when you look at that amount of money that's required, the money that we raise from the rights issue will go towards those projects.
And just looking at that, we want to be, especially that whole mixture, are we now going to get to a point where, like hydro, we get overcommitted on geothermal, or are we looking for alternative sources?
No, we will not get overcommitted because, as I said, as the capacity for generation increases, we expect that even people that perhaps never wanted to invest in Kenya because they didn't have power supply will now be coming in. So we'll have a good mix where there's geothermal, where there's hydro, and you're also aware that government is putting up a coal plant through some investors there. So it's always good to have a mix. You don't want to be too over-reliant on one source, so it's good to have all these types of sources as long as what you're putting in is really the most economic and also least cost.
All right. Yes. Albert Mugo, always a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much.
That has been Albert Mugo, the Managing Director for Kengen, just telling us about how long Kenyans have to wait for until the advent of cheaper power, which is already there by 30% reductions in the power bills. Now,